This is Spiro for Newsbud Spotlight.
Hello, everyone. This is Sibel Edmonds with Newsbud.
Now, today we have new headlines on ISIS Twitter accounts making threats to attack LAX, JFK, and London Heathrow airports. Now, this came out less than one full day after our coverage on the Istanbul airport attack. Now, Sibel, you interestingly, in our presentation, which was less than 48 hours ago, you made an interesting prediction here. Let's take a look.
Another interesting observation is we are looking at all these NATO countries. I mean, we are looking at Paris, we are looking at Brussels, we are looking at Istanbul, all NATO members. And I would say, if I were to predict, I don't have that crystal ball. I usually don't engage in prediction. I would say we are looking at another incident, more major, more massive, whether it's going to be in the United Kingdom or it's going to be in the United States, as maybe the final catalyst for what is already in the plans for Syria and on the so-called Western countries, nations created ISIS. And whether it's London or whether it's JFK in New York, my prediction would be in the next couple of months, we are going to have another massive one that's going to be used to have the boots on the ground in Syria.
So, Sibel, what is your reaction to this? I mean, do you indeed have that crystal ball, or do you have inside sources with ISIS? I mean, this was pretty much on the money.
Oh, well, it sounds like it. I guess I would attribute it to some sort of educated guess when you step back and you study the pattern of how things take place, especially with staged events, with the false flag operations. You see that there is usually a grand prize on the other end. Sometimes it's based on one event, sometimes several, it takes several. So it was interesting that less than 48 hours after that prediction, ISIS, with their social media managers and with their social media savvy publicists, they put out this very specific threat out there. I still don't agree with the timeline. I don't believe we are going to see any major attacks on July 4th of July in the United States, because that would be too specific and that would make it much harder for the real bosses, the ones who are actually managing the strings up there, to save face and say, well, we didn't have a specific information. We didn't have any specific dates. I'm going to still stick with my timeline of within the next 2 months, not as early as tomorrow, 4th of July, but I would say United States, United Kingdom, either or, and it's going to take place within the coming weeks or couple of months.
Well, we also briefly covered the so-called mastermind of the Istanbul attack, Akhmed Chatayev. Let's take a look there.
Here comes like one of the most interesting aspects of this whole scripted, narrated report incident, terror incident, so-called terror incident, and that has to do with the mastermind of this so-called terror event. And they have already identified the mastermind as a Chechen background from Dagestan region, Akhmed Chatayev.
Okay, so today, earlier this morning, we published a thorough and exclusive article/analysis provided by Newsbud analyst and reporter Christoph Germann, based in Germany. Now, Sibel, it's funny that this guy's name keeps popping up here.
Oh, it certainly is. And for people who have been paying attention, it's not only this guy's name that just very quickly popped up by, I believe, originally this Turkish publication called Yeni Şafak. So that's interesting. It was within the first 12 hours. Not only they knew everything about the culprits involved and their backgrounds, etc., and they got one of them wrong and they switched name, which is all interesting. And the fact the culprits all had Central Asian, Caucasus background. So let's forget about that one for a second as well. But we should also look at the mastermind. It's like I mean, with such great intelligence capability, you kind of wonder how any attack can be carried out by the terrorists. They pinpointed this mastermind, and lo and behold, he has Chechen background. Now, people remember Boston Marathon bombing, the so-called event that we had, the terror event we had in Boston. Again, the culprits involved, Tsarnaev brothers, where were they from? Chechnya, Chechens. Well, Chechens live in Russia proper, so they don't have their own independent nations, so they are there. Unlike, let's say, Uzbekistan or Kyrgyzstan, former Soviet Union states that basically after the fall of the Soviet Union were established as separate entities, countries. Well, Chechens don't have that. They have been fighting, battling for their own independence. They are Muslims. They speak Turkic language. Their heritage is different. So as we see things like in Tibet, they want to have their own separate autonomous entity, not to be part of Russia. So we are seeing it again, the Chechen element. So that is the most important point here. So I was overjoyed when I checked my email and I saw this article analysis put very thoroughly, well researched, and so quickly, timely together by our Newsbud Boiling Frogs Post analyst in Germany, Christoph Germann. So I said, that's fantastic. Let's publish it immediately. And of course, bring in Christoph and delve deeper into the elements and the implications involved with this really interesting figure, Chatayev.
Okay, well, let's bring in Christoph now. Christoph is currently in Germany. Hi, Christoph. How you doing? And thank you for joining us on such short notice.
Thanks for having me.
What time is it there in Germany?
It's almost midnight.
Wow. Well, thanks again for, first of all, writing that excellent article and then taking the time staying up late to join us here for this recording. Now, I read your recent article, and you really did an excellent job showing the timeline over decades following this supposed mastermind, his multiple arrests in multiple countries, each one of which was followed by extradition requests from Russia, every one of them being denied, ultimately leading to his release from custody every single time. Now, what can you tell me about this so-called supposed mastermind and all of his get-out-of-jail-free cards?
Yes, Akhmed Chatayev was one of those famous Chechen freedom fighters that were promoted by Western media in the late 1990s when they fought against the Russian government. And I've seen reports saying that Chatayev fought in both Chechen wars. I'm not sure about that, but it's safe to say that he fought in the Second Chechen War. And during the war, he was captured by Russian authorities. And depending on whom you want to believe, some reports are saying that he lost his arm due to a wound sustained during fighting. But Chatayev, for example, has been claiming that he lost his arm as a result of torture after he was arrested by the Russians. I'm suspicious of this claim because he has used it repeatedly in court to get out of jail. But I wouldn't rule it out because a lot of nasty stuff was happening in Russia, in Chechnya in the late 1990s, on both sides, of course. Chatayev then got offered a job by the Georgian government, by then Deputy Interior Minister Lordki Panidze, who just gave an exclusive interview to the Daily Beast, where he tried to obfuscate what really happened and what Chatayev was doing in Georgia. He claimed that he hired him as an informer and to prevent terrorist attacks in Georgia because Chatayev was having so great connections to the North Caucasus insurgency. After all, he was a trusted associate of Doku Umarov. He was traveling around Europe, raising funds for the insurgency, recruiting fighters, and doing everything he could to support the Chechen struggle for independence, much to the dismay of Russia, of course. The Georgian authorities didn't have a problem with that, quite the contrary. They tried to use the Chechen fighters to destabilize Russia, and they set up a secret training program for Chechen fighters, apparently in February 2012. And it's important, of course, to note that Georgia during this time was, for all intents and purposes, a US colony. Saakashvili was still running the country, and he did his best to turn Georgia into a US colony. And his close associate, Lord Kipanidze, then Deputy Interior Minister, was in charge of running this secret training program. They brought Chechens from Europe to Tbilisi, the Georgian capital, and then supplied them with arms and trained them at military bases near the capital. And Chatayev was apparently involved in this program. Lord Kipanidze said in this interview that he was an informant and that he was happy with his work for more than a year, which suggests that Chatayev was at least working for 1 year for the government. And during this time, this program was running, which was then exposed a few months later in August 2012, when a group of these fighters that had been trained by the Georgian government clashed with Georgian security forces near the Russian border. After this little problem in Georgia, Chatayev then apparently moved to Turkey, like the survivors of the Lopota clashes. 9 Chechen fighters survived the clashes, and they were assisted by the Georgian Interior Ministry in traveling to Turkey. And shortly thereafter, Chatayev also reportedly turned up in Turkey. In early 2015, we have seen the first reports saying that Chatayev was working for ISIS, recruiting fighters from Georgia's Pankizi Gorge and helping to bring them via Turkey to Syria. And in February 2015, he then appeared in an ISIS video. From this point on, it was clear that Chatayev was a terrorist. Up to this point, he was something between a freedom fighter, a refugee, or a useful dupe for Turkish authorities, for the Georgian authorities, or anyone else for that matter. But from this point on, he was, of course, a dangerous terrorist. And in October last year, the US put Chatayev on the government list for global designated terrorists. So his background is really interesting, to say the least. He's not your usual ISIS mastermind, terrorist mastermind.
Oh, yes, indeed. Now, let's quickly recap this in terms of 2 major elements that goes within the same scripts we've been seeing repeating itself. We just pointed out to one, this attempt to bring in that Chechen elements to the recent terror incidents and terror events. Now they're trying to tie Chatayev to Brussels airport bombing as well. They believe that he may have been one of the masterminds in that Brussels attack. Of course, I just mentioned Boston Marathon bombing. We had Chechen elements. So that's one element that we're going to get into with Operation Gladio B. Let's set aside that one. The other repeating pattern that we are seeing here is what? All these people, including the culprits in Brussels attack, in the airport attack, the culprits in Paris attack, we see the same pattern of being arrested and then released, being reported by one intelligence agency to the host country and being disregarded. Again, being arrested in some serious charges and then being released. And we are observing the exact same repeating element of the scripted, of the synthetic terror events with beneficiaries. In this case, with Istanbul airport terrorist attack, the so-called Istanbul airport terrorist attack. Just take a look at how many times this guy has been arrested, right? I mean, from the moment that he leaves Russia around 2001, he was arrested in Austria. He was arrested in Bulgaria. You know, we are looking at Georgia. He was arrested in Sweden. Meanwhile, with Russia having him on the terror list, the terrorist list, and with all the extradition requests, this guy making his rounds in all these NATO countries, Western European countries, or Western country allies, unscratched, untouched, and everything is just fine, right? So this is the pattern that we keep coming across. Now, let's go back to these dates. The reason I found these dates in your article so revealing and so very interesting has to do with, of course, Christoph, a subject you're very familiar with, since you've been with us and you've been following Corbett Report as well, Operation Gladio B. And you said around late 1990s, he started his operations in Russia. And what we know from Operation Gladio B is Operation Gladio B went into full effect around 1997. So we look at the fit that we see here, these activities by Chechens in Russia, Operation Gladio going into full effect. And while you were researching his activities and his relationship with Dostum, did you come across anything that pointed out some of the major terrorist events in Russia, inside Russia?
No, we actually know very little about his activities in the late 1990s and about his involvement in the Second Chechen War, for example. All we know is that sometime he came into close contact with Doko Umarov and became a close and trusted associate of Umarov and was his representative in Europe for all intents and purposes when he traveled across Europe later in the early 2000s. But we know very little about his activities in the late 1990s.
Thank you. And this is one thing that would be also revealing. Now let's look at the next date here. So he left Russia for Azerbaijan in 2001. And well, we all know the significance of year 2001. This is when we had 9/11. This is when my case came to be known. I started my whistleblowing within the FBI with elements involved in 9/11 that came from Azerbaijan, you know, the collaboration between Azerbaijan and Turkey and the United States and United Kingdom. And he is in Azerbaijan. Do we have the specific month in terms of the date that he went to Azerbaijan? Does it say early 2001 or summer 2001? That would be another interesting piece that may be revealing, and hopefully we will have some people among the viewers from the region or other researchers who can maybe point to the exact date when Chatayev moved from Russia to Azerbaijan. Are we talking pre 9/11? Are we talking about post 9/11? That will be revealing. The other thing that is, I think, important is Chatayev remained in Azerbaijan between 2001 and 2003. Now, these 2 years were extremely significant for Azerbaijan and its membership to NATO, because 2001 to 2003, this was post-coup attempts on Aliyev Sr. before his son came into power. As you know, Operation Gladio, they were not happy with Father Aliyev, the president of Azerbaijan, who was pro-Russians. So they sent Chatlı from Chicago to Azerbaijan to have the attempted assassination of the senior Aliyev. Then they hooked Aliyev's son, the current president, the filthy guy, the shady guy, the current Aliyev president. And of course, they also got senior Aliyev's brother hooked with his debt that he carried for all his gambling stuff. But this was when Azerbaijan nodded and they said, we are going to switch side. We're going to go from the taking Russian side to the Western side. And they basically officially, formally went into considering applying for membership with NATO. Did you find that interesting, the fact that during this whole Azerbaijan switching sides and wanting to join NATO? Interesting. And these are the 2 years Chatayev was in Azerbaijan.
Yes, that's very interesting, of course. And it's not surprising that Chatayev first turned up in Azerbaijan, of course. It's difficult for him to escape to Europe directly. He first had to go to either Azerbaijan or Georgia, for example, when he fled Russia. I think when he went to Azerbaijan, he then applied for asylum in Austria, and it took him some time to get it.
Yeah, that is very interesting. So when we are looking at all these timeline you put here and these years, and when we start looking at the macro picture of what was happening, around the globe or specifically within these countries, and move with Chatayev, it becomes really interesting how again the fit carries the showing all the patterns with Operation Gladio B. And interestingly, I want to emphasize what Christoph talked about here between years 2012 and 2015. He may still be there. We don't know because they claim that he's now in Syria. I think Syria may be a little bit uncomfortable with this guy, having one leg, one arm. I think I certainly would take that with several grains of salt. Let me put it that way. But he was in Turkey. Well, of course, the airport attack was carried out in Istanbul airport. And during these 3 years, again, NATO members, etc. And of course, we know Turkey's role in Operation Gladio B as the top role, as the pawns, as the implementers, facilitators of NATO-US Operation Gladio B steps, meaning utilizing the Chechens in order to counter Russia. And of course, Chechens we've been seeing coming up a lot, not only with the terror incidents, but in relation to ISIS. And according to them, that is his last known whereabouts. He's in Syria, another place with Western interests, current Western interests. So looking at all this stuff, okay, and stepping back and moving back and saying, who really benefits? Who benefits, let's say, in this Istanbul airport attack? Who are the beneficiaries of this attack? And I would like to get your take because I'm sure Spiro has his take on that as well, and I certainly do, and I'm outspoken on those. But let's start with you, Christoph.
I think many people benefit. For example, the Russians benefit from highlighting the Chechen terror threat. Maybe it's kind of the needed bone for the Russians to step back in Syria, to say, listen, we are now highlighting the Chechen terror threat and supporting your war on terror in the North Caucasus in exchange for taking a step back in Syria. But I don't think that this would work. The Russians have really drawn a red line in Syria and have shown in the last couple of years that they are not prepared to make the same mistake they have made, for example, in Libya a few years ago.
Spiro, you've been quiet for a while. Tell us about your take. Who do you see as the beneficiaries and how with Istanbul airport attack? Because many of our viewers have been, especially those not familiar with Operation Gladio B, the more macro picture, the chessboard, they come up with the question saying, well, you're saying that this is kind of one of those false flag operations, but why? How would US, how would anyone benefit from this? What would be your answer to that?
Well, through these terror events, whether they're manufactured, and by that, I mean, like you pointed out earlier, Sibel, we're seeing a recurring theme take place here. Every one of these guys, whether it's the Orlando shooter or the Chechen mastermind, I mean, they all have documented contact with governments, and whether it's the FBI or the Georgian government. So that right there is a reoccurring theme. And then so when these events take place, it's going to further their agenda. This is known as the Hegelian dialectic, for example, problem, reaction, solution. If you want to restrict liberties and impose, a heavy-handed government rule, you can't directly, in this country, for example, in the U.S., just go there directly. I mean, you have to incrementally get there, and you can pose a problem or a solution, a problem that benefits you in the long run. That way, the people will be begging for that ultimate solution that you wanted there. Now, as far as this quote-unquote Chechen mastermind, As Christoph pointed out in his article here, within a few years, he had gone from working for the U.S.-backed Georgian government and enjoying all the protection from the West to becoming one of the most wanted terrorists and most sought-after masterminds, despite only having one arm and one leg. They can't catch this guy. I mean, he'd be pretty easy to spot, and he can't really get away too fast. So to me, a lot of this has that element of kind of being almost ridiculous and putting it in the public's faces. And for the most part, the public eats it up. They buy it hook, line, and sinker every time, and they want that surveillance. They want that protection from the government, even though they don't stop or foil any of these supposed attacks.
No, those are absolutely agreed. I just can't see anyone arguing against the points you made. Now, I would say before I go through the beneficiaries of Istanbul airport terror attack, the so-called, I like to put so-called. I know I keep repeating myself. I like to, because I can say synthetic terror events, which is the hallmark of the Operation Gladio B, and you just refer to it as manufactured terror attack. So instead of saying synthetic, I say based on what they are saying. They call it this organically grown, ISIS-grown terror attack. That's why I call it so-called terror attack. When you have all these manufactured, planned out synthetic terror events, I wouldn't call it really naturally occurring terror attacks. But before going into the beneficiaries, I would like to point out to the timing of this Istanbul attack. Okay, let's take the terror out of it. One is we started seeing the headlines on Russia-USA agreement being signed, and Russia was refusing to comment on it. We saw it on the headlines of Russia Today, the Russian government mouthpiece. We saw it in New York Times. We saw it all over Turkish newspapers that supposedly the agreement has been reached between Russia and the U.S. on Syria. And Russia's role when we are planning to escalate in Syria in terms of providing the air support to the U.S. forces, U.S./NATO sources. So this event takes place, Istanbul attack, right around the time when we have Russia-USA agreement being reached on Syria. Number two, just a couple of days before this Istanbul attack, we started seeing the headlines about restoration of relationship between Turkey and Russia. Turkey was apologizing to Russia for downing their airplane, their pilot, and Russia kind of batting its eyes with Russia. I don't mean the public. Putin saying, okay, I guess it's time to forgive. Let's just kiss and make up. And in the midst of this, we also have interesting escalation in Israel's role, because Israel has been visiting Russia and they have escalated their number of visits. And we also had Erdogan of Turkey basically kissing and making up with Israel and saying we are restoring our relationship with Israel. So we have to always look at what's taking place, what has been the climate. So we have Israel, Turkey, Russian relations, major, all of a sudden, unexpected changes in that. We have this Russian-US agreement on Syria. And of course, Syria being now approaching its last stage. Whatever has been playing around, what has been in effect, it's about to come to an end. And we know that Obama and its administration would like to say, oh yeah, this is one of our things. We didn't leave a mess behind. We finished it. He wants to have George Bush's mission accomplished moment, okay, before he leaves office. Obama wants to stand up there and say, we made peace with Iran and reached agreement. See, we didn't attack Iran. And number two, we cleaned up, we finished Syria issue. Mission accomplished. Of course, we know the situation Iraq has been. Since mission was accomplished, we know the situation in Libya since mission was accomplished. Well, I believe that mission is accomplished moment is about to approach, coming for Obama administration before he is finished and gets the hell out of the White House. That's one thing we are expecting. So in the midst of this, we have this Istanbul airport attack. And I would say I agree with Christoph. Russia is not a loser here. Russia is a beneficiary. Russia wants to gain PR, positive PR for all the suffocation and everything that it's been doing, carrying out against Chechens. And I'm not talking about the terrorist Chechens. There are so many people in Chechnya who have been basically seeking their own independence, autonomy, because of vast cultural differences, religion difference, language difference with proper Russia. Now, Russia proper. So Russians are beneficiaries. Of course, the US, NATO / Turkey being member, they are beneficiaries of this. Blame it on ISIS. So it's ISIS. We want to have that catalyst. This is before the major attack comes. And also bring in the Chechen element, mix it up, put it in the mix. The losers here, guys, I would say the losers are the people in every single one of these countries. The losers, Americans, and their security, their welfare, their economy. The losers, the Turkish people on the ground, the ones who lost their lives, the ones who got injured, the ones who are being used, and nothing is serving their interests within all these schemes that we talked about. The losers, I think the public, the people in Russia, they're of course losers. And so Chechens are the losers here. So the only winners that I'm seeing here, beneficiaries, are the 0.001%, the deep state players of both sides in this case, and the losers being we the people. Christoph?
Yes, that's exactly right. I'm still very suspicious of these reports claiming that the United States and Russia reached an agreement on Syria. I don't see it happening. I believe it when I see it, but for now, I think the differences are too huge between the two sides. I know that both sides want to reach a deal, especially before Obama leaves office, because the next US administration under Hillary Clinton is more eager to get militarily involved in Syria in a huge way, not just with special forces, but with a full-blown invasion. And it's probably the last time to reach a deal, but I just don't see it happening right now.
Well, in every one of these events that take place, and it's always setting up the next shoe to drop. And oftentimes we see administrations doing the same. They will sign things into place, or certain events will take place to where an administration will come in later and be able to implement that like it was set up perfectly, play by play. And of course, Sibel, I agree with you that it is always the state who is the beneficiary in any of these events, and the people ultimately are the losers unless they decide to do something about it, make a stand, continue to expose these deep state agenda as it's happening. Because this is, as far as I'm concerned, the season of false flags, and I'm sure we will see a lot more to come. So we need to stay on the ball, keep our eyes peeled, and be ready to pounce. We have to stay one step ahead.
Well, I too want to thank Christoph for being available and joining us this evening, his time being so late, and for this great article, putting everything, providing people with the context, with the history, with the well-researched, well-documented article, and then coming here and providing us with a great perspective. And we going to be back with more episode. I don't think we are quite done with this topic. We're going to keep coming back. We're going to keep visiting and revisiting this issue. And as I said, I'm still going to go with my crystal ball-less prediction that we're not going to see many more multiple attacks, but I believe we're going to see a really big, major one. It's going to be either here in the United States or the United Kingdom. And I'm gonna stick with that for now. Spiro?
Well, we can never rule out. I would say just one last point here. We can never rule out simultaneous type of attacks. I mean, that would further add to the confusion. Harder to keep track of BS stories at that point. But again, So Christoph, thank you so much for joining us here on Spotlight with Newsbud, and we will be back with another episode soon.
Thank you.
Bye.